Don, good evening. Nice to see you
Uh,
again, my friend. How's life?
Very good, John. Thanks for asking. Yep, looking forward to the show today. I got a lot to talk about.
Let's move on. Go back in history and look at the heavyweights. And the
Right.
one fight I've always been looking forward to actually discussing with you is the original bad man. We talk about Mike Tyson being an intimidating fighter, but Mike Tyson was a pussycat compared
Mm.
to this man, Sonny Liston.
Oh yeah.
Um,
hmm
tell me the story of Charles and his beginnings and his dreadful downfall.
Well, from beginning to end, it's a great. Well, there's some fantastic heroic parts in it and some great achievements, but it was a tragedy waiting to happen. I don't know any heavyweight who came into the world in worse circumstances than Sonny Liston. And we know most fighters are born into poverty, but Liston was an exception even beyond that. He was born in Arkansas about 1932. Nobody knows quite for sure. One of
Mm,
13. He had a father. Toby was abusive and alcoholic, and whatever conditions led him to that. The depravity that they lived in, no opportunities, a black family, and really in the South. And as I said, Liston could have been born in 1830 as much as 1930, as the conditions were. He had no education. His father beat him regularly. He had no love from his mother. She abandoned the family after beatings by the husband and 13 children that she couldn't cope with. And Liston was pretty much on his own from the time he was 6 or 7 years of age. He wanders into St. Louis looking for his mother. He's basically rejected. He gets into petty crime. He's arrested for minor offenses, then major offenses, goes to prison. He's around the mob like a leg breaker, a gopher, driving the cars, doing whatever they want. So he was, we have this expression in America, mobbed up. He was intricately involved with gangsters and the gangster life from almost the inception of his being. He takes to boxing once he's in prison, is an intimidating force, comes out. The mob starts him out. He starts winning fights. He's just better than anyone else. He gets arrested again, goes back to prison, comes out, fights his way back into contention. He turns pro in 53, doesn't get a shot at the title 62, 10 years into the game. For at least 5 years before being champ, he is the de facto heavyweight champ. He's the best heavyweight in the world. So he, just on every single level, great, brutal fighter, wins the title by a one-round knockout, the only heavyweight champ to do it, unprecedented, defends it by a one-round knockout in the first
mm.
fight. And then he meets a force of nature, Muhammad Ali, changes the game, comes back later, fights his way back into contention, is knocked out by Leotis Martin, has one more fight, dies in mysterious circumstances in Las Vegas at the age of about 38 or 40. And just a great enigma, but as a fighter, a truly great fighter.
Let's put some meat on the bones. So in prison, he was in one of the toughest prisons in the United States, and he was a man you feared. He was the one you didn't want to bump into, walking around the corner. He was a guy that his reputation on the inside traveled to the outside, where the mob thought we could do something with this guy because he could actually fight. He wasn't a fluke. It wasn't feed him a bum. When he actually came out to fight, he was beating all the number ones. He was knocking out people like Cleveland Big Cat Williams, who at the time was revered to be one of the biggest punchers in the heavyweight division,
Yes.
hitting fighters and knocking several teeth out their head. So he was originally, you look at Mike Tyson, and so I suppose in our day when we look at Mike, we know he's crazy high. He was an intimidating figure. But Sonny Liston, he made Mike Tyson look like a choir boy.
Oh, absolutely. Sonny Liston was every suburbanite's greatest nightmare. This is the guy you feared coming in your window in the middle of the night. Oh my God, I don't want to meet him in a dark alley. He had a reputation that was deserved. He did go to hard time in prison. And, it's interesting to contrast two amazing careers that really paralleled one another, Floyd Patterson and Sonny Liston. And for Floyd, also had a hard life. Born in Carolinas, came up to New York with 13 kids in the family, father not there. But he had the advantage of being raised in a big city like New York, where there were these programs like the PAL and youth programs that he could take advantage of. And he did. He got in early. By 17, he was Olympic gold medalist. By 18, he was fighting in Madison Square Garden. By 21, he was a world champ. Everything took off for him. Liston, exactly the opposite. There was a roadblock with everything. He had the hard way to go. But when Floyd wins the title, he's not fighting any good contenders. He's fighting Pete Rademacher, who was an Olympian, never had a pro fight, picking up guys like Roy Harris, goes 12 rounds with Floyd. Liston fought him, knocked him out in one. He's fighting Brian London. They couldn't get Henry Cooper. London came over. Whereas Liston is fighting all the contenders that Floyd wouldn't box. Nino Valdez. You mentioned Cleveland Williams. Wayne Bethea, 1-round knockout. Mike DeJohn. Zora Foley, 3-round knockout. He's just blowing through everybody and left and right. Whereas Floyd is avoiding guys. He gets in that series with Inge Mario Hansen, Floyd Patterson, makes himself rich, but Liston's still on the sidelines, fighting all the
do you think Patterson, if he had the choice, he would have avoided Liston? Because, Floyd Patterson was one of those fighters that he probably didn't believe how good he was, no matter how successful he became. Do you think Liston was that fighter where Floyd, he was kind of put into a position where he had no choice but to fight because there was nobody else to fight and for people to take him seriously?
No, correct. He had a manager, Customato, who also ended up handling Tyson, and before that, Jose Torres, a brilliant man. And he knew, look, the job of the manager is to get the most money for the least risk. And Patterson was phenomenally well handled, made great money, even though the newspapers decried him and criticized him for fighting these inept fighters where Liston was fighting the contenders. He would have kept them away. He would have thought, D'Amato's theory was that Liston would eventually implode, that he was such a bad guy, he'd get arrested again and be taken off the scene, or he'd lose because he wasn't going to train. So he thought he could wait him out. And they waited and waited. But the public, public sports fans, they're sports fans. They don't really care. They'll forgive almost anything if they can see a good event. So whatever Liston was willing to say, he deserved a shot and eventually got it. As you say, there was no one else. There was smoke cleared and the guys were facing each other, and that was it.
Opposites attract. Floyd Patterson was loved and revered by the public and the press, whereas Sonny Liston was villain. He was a villain, And you have a lover hero, or you love a villain, but he was a villain, and he really. They say the people that were in his circle, they knew him, and he was sort of like a big cat. But the one people out of his circle, the general public, opponents, the press, he was cold. He was heartless with them.
Yeah, it's interesting because Patterson was revered as a person. He was quiet, soft-spoken. He had his troubles as a young boy in a juvenile delinquency, but he was revered as a soft-spoken, lovely guy, but not respected as an athlete because he wasn't fighting the best fighters. Liston, contrarily, was incredibly respected as a fighter, but not as a human being. So you have if Patterson was the fight of Liston and Liston had the personality of Patterson, it would have been one great amalgamation of a human being. Unfortunately, neither one could mix it up. But Liston was always respected as a great fighter, whereas Patterson was not. But he was accepted more as he was the guy, the hero, the humble guy, and this and that. Whereas Liston was just perceived as a brute. And some of it, I've talked to people who knew him. I only met him once, and they said it was not deserved. He could be very close and friendly with certain people if he knew them and liked them. Other times, because he had painted such a picture of him, he had this perception of this.
That story sounds so much like, I'd say, Mike Tyson or George Foreman, and it sounds so much like that. I suppose it's a product. You're a product of your environment and how you're perceived by the general public, or if you understand how to play the press, should I say?
Yeah, I mean, if you've met Tyson, and he's loved by some people, will swear by him as the most wonderful guy in the world. The general attitude is different, but he's truly become an icon. I remember, and you mentioned Foreman. When George Foreman started, Liston was great influence on him because they were in the same camp. Dick Sadler had them both. He would spar with Liston, and he had this very surly attitude. And people didn't like George Foreman. He did wave the flag, but underneath that, there was, after he had this loss to Jimmy Young and had this epiphany and came back, now he was the most lovable man. He's like a new Santa Claus, this great guy, the preacher. Totally reinvented himself, but early he was more Liston than he was this jovial guy selling cookie machines on the yeah. So the perception's not the reality.
So he goes on. He blitzed through Floyd Patterson, and then he has to fight the Louisville Lip, Muhammad Ali, and that was probably, would you say, the turn or the beginning of the turn of Liston's life career desire for the game, because at that point it was pretty easy for him. Then losing to somebody like Ali must have
Hmm.
hurt him so much, pride-wise and everything.
Hmm.
Surrounded by rumors of deception and corruption. Do you believe that?
Well, and then you have of course, the rematch we haven't even gotten into, the 1-round fight. I believe my theory with Liston, and I'll tell you this, Liston was my idol as a kid. I have Christmas cards that his wife would sign from Sonny. I'd exchanged Christmas cards with him.
Wow.
Met him after the Chuck Wepner fight. It was in the dressing room there. And he was just thrilled. It's Sonny Liston. That turned out to be his last fight. But I believe that, again, you go through the career. He turns pro in 53. Patterson turns pro in 52. By 1956, Patterson's the heavyweight champ of the world. Sonny Liston's fighting 4-round fights for $200. So he goes 10 years fighting, knowing you're the best fighter in the world, knowing you're the best heavyweight, that you're better than the champ, but not getting the opportunity. He goes to jail once. He goes to prison a second time. He comes out. He has to reestablish himself. He can't get a license in New York, the biggest venue for boxing in the world at that time. He couldn't get a license in California. So he's denied the big spotlight where he could go and make big money. So he has to fight in Denver, and he has to go fight in Philadelphia, and he has to go fight in Pittsburgh, not in the big city. So he's got all this frustration, and he wins the title after 10 hard years. And once he beat Patterson, that was the end for Sonny Liston. I truly believe that he was finished as a fighter, physically, mentally, psychologically. He had enough with the residue of greatness to beat Patterson on the fumes. And 1 round, John, you can hit a fighter on the chin in 1 round, knock him out. Doesn't mean you can still fight. It means you got lucky and hit him with a punch. But if the fight went 8, 9, 10, 12 rounds, could be totally different. So he had enough left to beat Patterson, but he was done. And people told me when Sonny won that title, he never trained seriously again a day in his life. He went out drinking, smoking pot. Women were like he never could imagine in his lifetime. These women available to him. I mean, this is a guy from Arkansas, the lowest of the low in Arkansas. And now he's got any woman that he wants to have, and the kind of women he wanted to do what he wanted. And just unbelievable. So when he fought Ali, the greatest psychologist in ring history, he was done. And he thought it was an easy fight going in. Everybody said he was going to kill Ali. People were saying we shouldn't even allow the fight to take place. He went in with a sense, I'll just blow him out. And when he didn't, he found out he was fighting what turned out to be, but not at that time, the greatest heavyweight in the world. He was humiliated. And the rematch was something different. Everyone has an opinion on that. I think he just laid down, just quit. To the hell with it. But he was a finished product after the Patterson fight. People say, how could it be? But I'm saying psychologically it can happen. I think it happened to Joe Frazier as well. When he beat Ali, that was it for him. And if you look at his career after that, there wasn't much left. He just had done all he could ever do. And I think that happened with Liston.
Don, you look at our sport, unfortunately, it's the same pattern across the way. Some fighters, their ambition, their dream, their steps are to become a regional champion, but once they reach that goal, which is such as world title, they find the struggle is to actually still be as motivated, because the hunger, now they've got what they wanted. It's the ones that can stay as world champion and still fight as though they're hungry, as though they're still chasing. They're the ones that really stand out. So I think Sonny was, when he was on it, when he was hungry, when he was chasing, he was, I agree, the most dangerous man going. To find by the time he got in with Ali, yes, he made the same mistake that most fighters have done. Thought, this kid's nothing. What's he going to do? He's crazy. Because I'm quite sure they never met anybody like Ali at that time, saying the things he did, acting the way he did. So for Sonny Liston, he was a no-nonsense guy. I believe after the first fight, that's against Ali, I think then that's the time when he started to fall back in love with boxing, because he thought, I can't make this happen to me again. And then when he got it turned over the second fight, then he's thinking, I want this back. Because he had 15 fights after that until he boxed Martin again.
Yes, that's right. He fought his way back into contention. He comes back. Ironically, he makes his comeback in Sweden, just like Patterson, his nemesis, who he knocked out twice, did before. And they praised him. He fought Gerhard Zek, I think, the first fight, and then Dave Bailey knocked him out. Elmer Rush. These are marginal contenders. At least Zek and Rush were. So he starts to fight his way back. He comes back into the States and beats Bill McMurray, a couple of decent fighters. Billy Joyner gets back on US TV with Henry Clark, finds himself the ratings again, and people are starting to pay attention. I mean, a great fight that was talked about on Liston's comeback was him and Joe Frazier. which would have been a really interesting
Oh my
fight.
God, can you imagine? Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
One time they were setting it up. Frazier had beaten Bonavena, and Liston fought that night with another contender, Amos Lincoln, in two different locations, and both won by knockout. And they were talking about it. But when Buster Mathis came back and he beat Chavallo, Teddy Brenner, who was the matchmaker of the Madison Square Garden, told him to wait, because if we have a fight with Mathis and Quarry will be a big fight for you. So the April fight was supposed to be Frazier and Liston. But when Quarry sort of emerged from the scene with a victor, when the Mathis Quarry fight was made, they said, wait till the outcome. So instead of fighting Liston in April in Houston, he fought Dave Ziegler, the 1-round blowout. And they said, well, this is too much of a risk. But there was that small window of allowing that fight to happen. Had Sonny beaten Martin, he would have been a contender. He would have been the number one contender, and then they would have had to deal with him again. So it's unfortunate. Liston always had the brakes going against him.
They say he was the last fighter that was probably, whose career was probably managed or controlled or navigated by the mob. And that consequently, you look at the rest of his life outside of boxing, these connections outside of boxing. I think he went on for, it was 2 years since his, before he died, his last fight. So he kind of lost his way and lost his way a little bit. What would your view be on Liston's passing, the end of his career, when he eventually died? There was so many rumors flying about all over the place.
Well, you hear a lot from me. Again, the fight in Liston, the 1-round fight, and his death is so controversial. Everyone, I mean, I said it's the Kennedy conspiracy of boxing. Everything about Liston is, enigmatic. He did run with bad people. Look, Liston, unlike most fighters who were controlled by the mob, they weren't buddies of the mob. They had, managers who were in the mob. Many of them benefited because they put up money and they moved their careers. You could see it. It was done. They may have gotten big chunks of their income, but they moved the fighter. They were successful in how they managed the fighter. But Liston was actually, I wouldn't say in the mob, because obviously he wasn't a mafia Sicilian, but these are the people these were his friends. I mean, people he knew. That's the element he knew his entire life. So it wasn't that they were imposed on him, where you say, all right, I deal with my manager, but I have my personal life. The people he knew, or certainly most 99.9% of the white people he knew, were mob guys, and he was comfortable in that environment. As I said, he would do jobs, odd jobs. I was told a story, and many things is anecdotal, it's true, that before going to the Clay and the Ali, it was Ali by that time, Ali Liston fight, rematch. The rematch was supposed to be in Boston. And Liston, I was told, trained very hard. Remember, an older fighter, it's harder to get in shape. And by that point, 64, he was at least 32 to 34 years of age. And he got some shape. Ali got the hernia. And then Liston just, stopped. He had to start over again. They said he lost his condition. And a friend of his from Philly, who actually got him to go to Philadelphia, Blinky Palermo, Liston called him. He says, listen, if you're going to make a bet, don't make a bet on me. Not to say he's going to take a dive, but to say, I just don't have it. I'm not, I don't have it. And what transpired after that, I don't know. But he told his friends he just didn't have it. He wasn't there. I remember Milton Gross wrote an article watching Liston train for the Lewiston fight, saying Sonny Liston has taken on the look of a middle-aged man. So I think that he just didn't have it, just quit and whatever. The fight with Ali, if you recall, it was actually stopped with the two of them exchanging punches on their feet. Liston was counted out. Walker let them fight. Then he stopped the fight, which even added to the controversy. So I'm saying, but he knew mob people. At the end, they said he got to Vegas. There's a guy, Ash Resnick, who ran casinos there, who brought him out to Vegas for the Patterson fight, was always loved to be around athletes and fighters. And they said he had a blowout. The story I was told that Ash, loved fighters. He helped Joe Louis get established in Las Vegas. And that Liston was selling drugs to Louis, who was involved deeply in drugs at one point in his career. And Resnick got infuriated with Liston as the middleman. And Liston thought he was helping Louis. He wants drugs, I'll get him drugs. So there's a big fallout there. But they said he was involved in minor drug deals, selling pot, maybe dealing a little coke, and he rubbed people the wrong way. But there's so many stories. I don't doubt that he was using drugs. I've been told he smoked pot and on occasion snorted cocaine, and could have been so many question marks. But he was always in a bad element, and not by necessity. There was a point at this point, his champion had some money by choice. This is the world, the only world he knew, John. This is who he was.
How many children did he have, Sonny Liston?
Well,
And
yeah, none officially was his wife Geraldine, who was a long-suffering wife. As they said, they were married for his entire life. He never divorced, but they said there was a daughter that he had with another woman, and then allegedly a son that he had. But I don't know for sure. I know he had a lot of women. That's for certain.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it'd be good to be able to speak to family members that could tell you the Sonny Liston at home rather than the Sonny Liston that is
Yeah.
revered and known to by the public. Because I'm quite sure it shed a different light on that individual. I suppose like Mike Tyson's kids speaking about their dad. He's not Tyson. He's dad, and so that'd be very interesting to get to see.
I've spoken to many people who knew him. I only met him in a dressing room. He had a famous line after the fight of Wepner, which I heard among other people there. And they said, Sonny, do you think Chuck Wepner is the bravest man you ever met? And Liston stopped for a second. He said, no, one gamer, his manager. And Wepner had,
I've heard that before.
Yeah. So I vouchsafe for that. But yeah, people have talked to me who knew him, liked him. They didn't. I mean, there was a side of him that was bad, but people said he could be a very generous, a nice guy, had a wit. But again, he was so predisposed, he'd walk into a room, everybody move back from the table. Oh, it's Liston, move back to the side of the room, just showing up. So he carried such a reputation with him, maybe deserved or undeserved. Like the old gunfighter comes into town, everybody leaves town. I'm just coming in for a cold, get out. And that was unfortunate. It was like a guy carrying typhoid fever comes into town.
Don, great way to leave it. Again, one of our history makers of our sport, the heavyweight division, Sonny Liston. Always a pleasure to speak to you and hear your inside track, your inside take on yesteryear. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless, John.